The Arabs, especially after 750, there was an uprising. The Abbasids, when the Abbasids took over, they took out the Umayyads. They began a process of modernization where the Arabs ended up doing really remarkable things and extremely modern things. For example, they invent modern agriculture. They invent modern medicine. They invent hydraulics. They're the guys who figure out that light has a finite speed, that all objects in the universe have gravity and create attraction. They invent the lens, they create the scientific method, they are the ones who invent algebra, zero, they're the ones who start trigonometry, they dabble in calculus, they're stating Newton's first law of motion 600 years before Newton and Kepler's first law of motion 500 years before Kepler. Words like algorithm are Arabic. It comes from Al-Khwarazmi, the guy who invented algebra and zero, and algorithms, right? And so we're talking about an incredibly advanced civilization. And in all of these, some mechanism took them out. Gets a 1, 2, 3 set of blows that bring it down ultimately. The first blow is the Crusades, which weakens the Arabs. The second blow is the Mongol invasions, which is absolutely devastating. Baghdad was the greatest city on earth at the time. It was the center of learning. It was the center of math. It was the center of science. It was the center of philosophy. It was the largest city on earth at the time. It had fresh water piped into people's homes, sewage taken away. It had a fully modern plumbing system. They had streets that were lit up at night. They had fast food restaurants. And the Mongols showed up in 1258, surrounded the city. Before they surrounded it, they told everybody to leave. About 200,000 people fled the city. Then the Mongols proceeded to surround the city. They laid siege to it. Ultimately, somebody inside, for whatever reason, opens a section of gate. Once the Mongols are on the wall, the city quickly collapses. Everybody had assumed that nobody could ever capture Baghdad. It was built with 2 rows of walls, the outer walls lower than the inner walls, and then they had walls in between. It was supposed to be the top of the line technology, completely unsinkable. Oh, that's the Titanic. Anyway, same thing. And when the Mongols captured the city, they took the people in the city out and they lined them up and then proceeded to decapitate them. And after they massacred the 800,000 people, they then continued their rampage. And in this way, the Arab civilization was dealt a very serious blow. And as if that wasn't enough, a little bit less than 100 years later, the bubonic plague rampages through the Arab world and kills about 40, maybe as much as 50% of the Arab population, and brings the Arabs to their knees. In the aftermath and the dust of all of that, Europeans take advantage and they fill the gap. And the reason they can do this is twofold. Well, really onefold. It's totally tied together. When the Crusaders are returning back from the Crusades, they're bringing back Arab technology. They're bringing back Arab knowledge on how to do agriculture. So there's an immediate agricultural revolution in Europe that allows for an increase in agricultural output. More food means a larger population you can support. On top of that, the Arabs had just invented modern medicine. And modern medicine, the reason it's modern medicine is the guy who did it, his name is Ibn Sina. He wrote a book called the Canon of Medicine in 1025 AD. When he wrote this book, he said in the book that diseases are caused by germs. So all you have to do to prevent diseases is interrupt the transmission vectors. And he said the best thing to do then would be to wash your hands with soap. And then after that, he said, that failing, if you still get the disease, here are some cures. And he goes into all this detail about how to make for a healthier society. That book is still required reading in Europe and parts of the Middle East to this day for med students, because it still applies. The Crusaders are bringing back that information. They're bringing it back to Europe, and then that information is being applied to European civilization, and the mortality rate in Europe starts to drop, but the birth rate in Europe doesn't. And so you end up with a massive population explosion. It gets a little bit of a hiccup when the bubonic plague arrives in Europe. 25 or to 35% of the European population is decimated in the process. On the other side of it, European population starts to increase geometrically, and the technology that these Crusaders have brought back from the Middle East is taking hold, and the next thing you know, you have the Renaissance, and then the Renaissance turns into the Enlightenment, And before you know it, Europe has conquered almost the entire planet.